Good afternoon. So this is the fifth session of the weekly Zoom live talk organized by Kappa HC, Chinese American Parent Association of Howard County. I'm Dr. Yun Lu, and this event is sponsored by COED, Howard County Community Organizations Active in Disaster. So today we have Judge Kuchno, and he's going to talk about our court system. Judge Kuchno served as a judge on the Circuit Court for Howard County. He was appointed to the bench by Governor Hogan for a 30-plus year distinguished career as Assistant Attorney General and a private practice attorney. He has served in leadership positions in local bar associations and for more than 25 years was a member of panels responsible for investigating ethical complaints against attorneys. Judge Kuchno graduated from the University of Maryland, and he has lived in Howard County for 35 years and has been active in the community, including as a coach for youth sports. So let's welcome Judge John Kuchno. And can everyone see him? There.
Okay, just want to make sure. All right. Hi, everyone. Boys and girls, young men and young ladies, thank you very much for having me. I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today and to talk to you about our court system. And as Dr. Liu mentioned, my name is Judge John Kuchno. I'm a judge on the Circuit Court for Howard County. I serve in the county. I've been a judge starting almost a year and a half now. Was appointed by Governor Hogan in December of 2018, and I started basically at the beginning of 2019 and been a judge ever since. So the first question that you might wonder is, what is a judge? What does a judge do? Well, you may have seen some television shows or movies about the court system, and maybe you've seen on TV, there's these programs that there's Judge Judy and Judge Joe Brown and that sort of thing. Judge does a couple of things, and I try to, if you are involved in sports, you might think of a judge sometimes as a referee or an umpire. So if you play baseball or basketball or soccer or many other sports, the referee is there to make sure that the game is played correctly, that it's played according to the rules, that that the people involved play according to the rules so that you get a fair result. And that's a lot of what a judge does. But sometimes a judge is like another kind of referee that actually decides a case. So if you were involved in gymnastics and you're doing a routine, the judge actually makes a decision. The judges, will rate someone, or ice skating, when they do their routines on the ice, the judge will actually decide who gets the most points and who wins. So depending on the type of case, in court, a judge can either be an umpire, in a baseball analogy, like calling balls and strikes, or a decider, someone who decides the case and who wins and who loses. So that's basically what a judge does. And let me tell you how that fits into our system, because we're here to talk about the court system. All right. So those of you who are familiar with some of the things you've learned in school, you may remember that our government here in the United States and in our state, Maryland, is separated into three branches. And there's the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. Right? Those are the three branches of government. I have this little chart here, maybe you could see. So the three branches of government, maybe it's backward, I can't see it. But those are the three branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. So I'm a judge, I'm in the judicial branch. How do they differ? Okay. What happens is the legislature, those are the people we elect to Congress or to the General Assembly in Maryland. Those people are elected and they make laws. They make the laws that we live under. They pass those laws. They're signed by the executive. And then the executive is the person who implements those laws, the executive branch. So the legislature makes laws after the executive approves them. The executive implements those laws. So in the case of the United States, the executive is the president, right? Right now it's President Trump. It used to be President Obama. That's the executive. In the case of Maryland, our executive, who heads that branch of government, is the governor, Governor Larry Hogan. Okay, and I mentioned him earlier. He was the person who appointed me to the bench. Now, the third branch of government, and that's the one that we're going to talk about today, is the judicial branch, right? And what's the difference between the judicial branch and the other two branches? Well, the judicial branch is responsible for making sure the laws are followed, all right? So we have the laws are enacted by the legislature, implemented by the executive, and then the courts decide who is following the law and who's not. So what do courts do generally? What's the role of courts in our system? Well, it's two things really. One is it's basically to resolve disputes between citizens. So, you know, if you have a problem with your neighbor, and I realize we're talking about, you know, your boys and girls and you're in middle school to 12th grade. Some of you may be 18, I don't know, or you're going to be 18 soon. That's when you're considered an adult. If you have a dispute with someone, how do you resolve it? If you can't resolve it by working it out on your own, what do? Well, you go to the court system to resolve it. That's how you resolve the system. So say you're involved in a car accident and somebody hits you or you hit somebody and you can't work out who's responsible for that, who should pay. The insurance, and say there's insurance companies involved, they can't decide who's responsible. Well, you need somebody to resolve that dispute. What you do is you come to court, and that's what the courts exist for, to resolve disputes between people. And we do that in a civilized way, according to various rules that are passed and laws. The other thing that the courts do that's very, very important is we decide criminal cases. And criminal cases involve laws that the legislature, Congress, and the executive have passed, that certain conduct has been deemed so contrary, so different, so bad in a civilized society that they should be characterized as crimes. And when someone is charged with a crime, you come to court to decide whether that person is guilty or not guilty of the crime. All right? So that means that you have certain rights that you have as a citizen, and they're very important rights. If you are charged with a crime, generally you can be sent to jail. You could be sent to prison, or you could receive probation, which means you won't go to jail, but you're monitored, or you could pay a fine. And so our court system is a very important function, is to decide whether crimes have been committed and what should happen to the people who commit crimes, assuming they're guilty of committing those crimes. So we do those things. We resolve disputes between people, and we decide criminal cases. Now, criminal cases they can be very serious. You know, they can involve things like kidnapping, murder, someone kills someone else, burglary, someone broke into your house, theft. If somebody assaulted you, started a fight, all those things are decided by the criminal courts, right? And that's one of the things the court system does. So that's how we process the various things that the court system does. Now, there are a couple of, it's a little confusing, but there are actually two different kinds of court systems in our country. All right. There's a federal court system and there's a state court system. Right. So federal courts, state courts, two different types of system. The difference is federal courts implement laws that are passed by Congress. Okay, that's the national laws. Okay, state courts, there are 50 different state courts involving all the states. Each state has their own set of courts. They are involved in implementing state laws. Now, I don't want to get too technical here, but federal courts have what they call a limited jurisdiction. There's only certain type of cases that they can hear. And basically they involve cases brought under the Constitution, that's the governing document of the United States, and authorized by federal law. Also in federal court, you can have cases involving citizens of one state versus citizens of another state, or cases against a foreign government outside the United States. Certain types of cases overlap, where state courts and federal courts have what they call concurrent jurisdiction. That means they can do the same kind of case. But generally, the federal courts can only do cases that Congress tells them they can do. I'll give you an example. One type of case that the federal courts don't do, and it's reserved to the state, are family law cases. All right, those are cases involving children and parents, and custody arrangements, marriage, divorce. Those are federal. Those are not federal type cases. Those are reserved to the states. And the federal courts have a three-step system that's somewhat similar to what I'm going to concentrate on Maryland that we have in our state system. There's the lower level courts called the district courts in the federal system. Those are courts where trials are held, and I'll explain trials in a minute. Those are judges and juries, and they decide cases. Then there's a level above that called the courts of appeal. And that's if you are dissatisfied with the system that you get in the district court, you appeal it. You can say, I think that these courts were wrong, so please give me another chance. Here's why I think they were wrong. So you appeal it. You have an appeal to the circuit court. Then the level above the circuit courts, and I believe there's actually 12 different circuits in the United States. So there are sometimes can be one district in a state, or there can be multiple districts. In Maryland, we have basically one district. There's a northern division, a southern division. But in New York, there's at least 3 divisions. There's an eastern district, there's a southern district, there's a northern district. And then there's 11 or 12 circuits, 11 circuits, and then a federal appeals circuit. And then the ultimate level in the country is called the Supreme Court. Okay, they sit in Washington and they decide the highest level of cases in the country, and those are appeals from the circuit courts. That's basically the federal system. Now the state system I'm going to talk about in Maryland has a similar type system, and I'll tell you where we fit in and how we decide things. All right. In our state system, there are 4 levels of court, right, in the state of Maryland. The lowest level of court, working our way up, is called the District Court of Maryland. And they have judges, as I have in my court. The difference in the District Court of Maryland versus the court I'm on, the Circuit Court, is that you can't get a trial before a jury in the district court, the lower level court. It's only a judge decides the case. It also can only hear certain type of cases, up to a certain amount of money that's in dispute, like $30,000 is the limit that you can, of a value of a case. They also hear certain type of criminal cases. They hear what's called misdemeanors. Now those can be serious cases, but they're not as serious as what's called felonies. Those are the most important or most serious crimes. So misdemeanors versus felonies. So in the district court, they only hear the smaller cases, misdemeanors. So if your mother or father got a traffic ticket, for example, and they wanted to challenge that in court, they would go to the district court. and do that. There's also small claims courts. That means if the value of money isn't that much in dispute, you can go to the district court and have a judge decide the case and do it relatively quickly. There's such things as, they also do cases involving rent court and other civil cases. Again, there's a distinction between the kind of cases you can do. A criminal case involves a violation of the criminal law. That's a crime, something that the legislature has decided is a crime. There's also what's called civil cases. Okay, civil cases are generally a dispute about money. So basically, if you're having a dispute with your neighbor about, say, let's say you can't decide who should cut the tree over your yard, or the zoning for your property, or let's say their dog is coming over to your house and doing things on your lawn that you don't like, or, you know, again, maybe you were involved in a car accident, you can't decide. Well, if the amount in controversy that would pay you for what would reimburse you for what you say you suffered as a result of the action, then you go to the district court, right? So we have 4 levels of the court system. Again, I'll do my little chart here. I don't know if you see that. There's the district court, the circuit court, court of special appeals, and the court of appeals. That's the highest court. That's how we go. So we started in the district court, the lowest level court. Now we're coming to the circuit court. All right, that's the court that I'm in. We have a circuit court for Howard County, right here in the county. And that court, of which I'm a judge, hears more serious cases in terms of the value. Now, all cases may be serious to everyone involved, but in terms of the value of money involved and the types of crimes in a criminal case, those are heard in the circuit court. And the big thing about the circuit court that you should remember is this is where you can get a jury trial, right? This is very important because we have a system in this country called the jury system that not everyone in the world has, right? What's a jury? And you may have seen this on some television shows, again, or movies about courts. How does a jury system work? Well, juries are citizens, people in the community who decide cases. And what we do in the court system is we bring people into court. It's called jury duty. So your mother or father, your guardian, whatever, if you're over 18, you can get what's called a jury summons. And you're ordered to appear in the courtroom and put in a room with a bunch of other people, and you may just have to decide a case. So what's done is that people are chosen at random from all the people in Howard County, and they're summoned to appear in court, and they are reviewed by lawyers, and they are seated as jurors. And jurors, in the case where there's a jury trial, act as a judge because they decide the case, right? So I told you before, the judge can do 2 separate things. A judge can act as a referee or can decide a case. In a jury trial system, the judge is acting as the referee, but the jurors make the decision. They decide the case, right? The judge's role there is to act as the referee and decide what evidence the courts will hear, the jury will hear to decide the case. So the jury system is a very important right that we have in this country that not everyone in the world has. And that's very, very significant. The first jury trial in the United States was held in 1630 in the colony of Massachusetts. And the jurors had a case involving the murder of one of the Puritans. Actually was charged with murder. And the person was charged with a crime, jury convicted him, and he was promptly brought outside after the case and hung. That was justice back then. We don't have capital punishment anymore, but the jury system is very important. I'll give you an example. I say this to jurors when they come in, and a lot of people wondering how the system works and what's different about us. I was reading several months ago about a trial in Iran. That's how you resolve a dispute, through a trial. And it was resolved this way. 3 men were brought into a courtroom. They were put into a metal cage in the center of the courtroom. They were there for 5 minutes, and the judge sentenced them to death. That's justice in other parts of the world. We don't do that here. Now, I'm not saying we're perfect, but we have this system that is a jury system that people have very important rights. So how do we resolve cases? Here's the biggest thing that you should remember about the justice system, the judiciary, the court system. Right? We're always trying to do the right thing. But the most important thing to remember is that we are set up in our country, our state, as a system of laws. Okay, we live under laws. You may not realize it, and I realize you're students and you're growing up, but you're going to be, before you know it, you're going to be 18. You're going to be able to vote. You're going to be able to serve in a jury. But you live under a lot of laws. You don't even know how many laws. If you say your parents own a home, they're subject to the law. There's all kinds of laws owning a home. If you rent your home, you're subject to the law. People who drive are subject to all kinds of laws. If you go to the store and buy something, anything, believe it or not, you're subject to the law. There's all kinds of laws that govern that. Even if you cross the street, you're subject to the law, because there's only certain places you can cross the street, right? You're not supposed to do certain things. There's all kinds of laws relating to driving. There's all kinds of laws in business relationships with people. So we live under a system of laws. And what our courts do is we make sure those laws are followed when there's a question about criminal law or a question of disputes between people. Now, how do we know what the law is that we implement? Well, I told you before that the legislature makes laws. And so we look at that. There's another aspect of the law that we look at in deciding cases, and that is we've developed law over hundreds of years. It's what's called the common law. And we live in our country under what's called the English common law, first developed in England over hundreds of years, right? And actually, all of our states except one lives under this English law system. The one state that doesn't is Louisiana, that lives under what's called a Napoleonic code, because it was founded basically by the French, and that's a French code. But we live under these rules, and when you come to court and you have a dispute with someone, the decision is made based on these rules of which we live under. And that's what the courts do, is we try to act fairly and justly according to the rules that have been passed by the legislature, by Congress, and over time in this common law to decide disputes. Now, you may have seen something like this. There's the scales of justice, right? You've seen these scales, all right? And it's kind of a symbol for what we do in the courts. And the idea is, you may have heard the expression, justice is blind. What that means is we treat everyone fairly, and we certainly try to, fairly and equitably, and everyone is the same before the court. Right? We come in, we don't favor one party over the other. The idea is that when you come to court with a dispute, if you have the better case, you should win. We don't care what race you are. We don't care what nationality you are. We don't care how much money you have. We don't care who your parents are. everyone is equal before the eyes of the law. And that's what the scales of justice is. We can't look at outside things. We look at the law and decide. So when we have the scales of justice, if one side weighs down more than the other, that's the side that's going to win, according to the rules. The scales tip back and forth. Now, I told you about the jury system. We do cases differently, whether it's a criminal case or a civil case, a case involving money. And it's very important that you remember this. In a criminal case, in our state, 12 people have to decide the case and are on a jury. So if you are charged with a crime and you ask for a jury trial, 12 people will have to decide you are guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay, not just one, not two, not a majority. The verdict has to be unanimous. It means everyone has to agree that you are guilty. Okay? If one person says, I don't believe that, you can't be found guilty. You could have a hung jury, but the jury has to decide, all 12 people on that jury have to decide you committed the crime and what's called beyond a reasonable doubt. And and why do we do things that way? Because when you are charged with a crime and you could go to jail or go to prison, we could take your freedom away. You could be required to pay a lot of money in fines. We want to be sure that it's done fairly and that all your rights are complied with, that we followed all these procedures, because we don't want a situation like that situation I told you in Iran earlier, where people are coming in without having the rights that they're entitled to. We want to be fair. We want to be equitable. So not only do you have to have all the people on the jury convict you if you're charged with a crime, you have to find that the crime was committed beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a phrase, beyond the reasonable doubt. What does that mean? Well, one thing it doesn't mean is if one side is just a little bit more than another, like 51%, these are even now, 50-50. One side tips, that's not enough to convict you of crime. It has to be a lot more, beyond a reasonable doubt. What that means is you have to be convinced such that you would make an important decision in your life. You would feel confident in making that. So, for example, the people, if there's students on the line now, let's say you're going to college next year, right? Or in a couple of years. It's a very difficult decision. And you've seen all these schools, you visited them, and then you make your decision based on what's right for you. That's a very important decision, correct? Because you have, it affects your life, where you're going to go to school. You have to have the same level of confidence in that decision that I would make a decision in a similar way to decide this case. So if you had doubts, I may go to this school, I may not, I'm not sure, that's not enough. You have to make an important decision. Or let's say your mom and dad decided to buy a house, and the house costs a lot of money to buy a house, right? You're putting your savings on that. It's a very important financial decision. It's probably thousands and thousands of dollars. Well, when they make that decision, they have to be confident enough in that decision that they're going to spend all that money and have that degree of confidence in the decision. That's the kind of thing you have to convict someone beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, there's a difference in other cases that are not criminal cases, and those are cases involving money. They don't involve what's called beyond a reasonable doubt. They involve the scales of justice that are a little different. They have what's called the preponderance of the evidence. And preponderance means more likely than not. So if you were involved in a case about money, and let's say a car accident or something like that, the jury in that case would only have to decide whether one side is more likely to be believed than the other. So it's like 51%, just a little bit. Then that side wins the case. The other difference in a civil case, a case involving money, is that we don't have 12 jurors in the case. In our state, we only have 6 decide the case. So you don't get all those people. Now, all the people still have to agree on a decision, but they don't have to decide it beyond a reasonable doubt. It's just, is one side more likely to be believed than the other? And that's how those cases are decided. Just very briefly, so that's the court that I'm in. We hear the more serious cases, the felonies, very serious cases like robbery, armed robbery, serious crimes. We also hear in the circuit court, family law cases is a big part of what we do. Those are cases involving marriage, divorce, child custody, those type of situations. That's a large portion of what we do in our court. There are not jury trials in those cases. Those are decided by a judge. And we decide cases worth a lot of money, right? Into the millions of dollars, literally unlimited amount of money. Some cases come in and there's not much money in dispute. Other cases involve lots and lots of money. That's where we decide. Now, above us in our court system, there are 2 levels above the circuit court, and that's the court of special appeals and the court of appeals. Right? The court of special appeals is if you do not like the decision in the circuit court, you can appeal it. You can ask for another hearing in the court of special appeals. Now, those cases, you don't go in front of a jury. It's basically, they look at the record of the case, everything is typed up, and the judges decide whether the law was filed. And then there's one level above that. It's called the Court of Appeals. That's the highest court in our state. It's the equivalent of the Supreme Court of Maryland, and they decide appeals from the Court of Special Appeals or directly from the circuit court, and they only take cases they want. You have to ask the court for an appeal. So that's the difference between those courts. There's no jury trial system there, but if you're dissatisfied, you go to the Court of Appeals. All right, I've talked long enough. That's kind of the overview of our court system. That's how it works. I hope you have a better understanding now. But I can tell you this, that it's very important to people's lives, because especially now when we're all involved in this situation, where we're stuck inside, where we have this health emergency going on, people's rights are very important. There's certain things we can do and certain things we can't. And our court system probably is more important than ever now about what's going on, and how you can do things and what violates the law and what's not. I'll just mention you briefly. Our court system is still working through this. We're shut down, but we're still hearing emergencies. We're doing a lot of things by video. But when I talked about the jury system before, where we bring people in, we've stopped doing that, obviously because of this social distancing. And you can't just go down to the courthouse and show up the way before. We're doing things remotely, and we've postponed a lot of cases, so we recognize that. But a lot of these rights that we have, we're still acting to make sure that people's rights are implemented, and that we're still working through this crisis. We're just not doing it the same way. Okay. I don't want to speak too long, and I want to make sure that if anyone has questions, please feel free. I'll be happy to answer them.
Kuchno, thank you so much for the talk. So we do receive some questions from the audience. The first one is, are you also a lawyer?
Yes. To be a judge, well, I guess, yes, to be a judge, you have to be a lawyer. So there are certain requirements to be a judge, all right? And one of them is you have to be a lawyer in Maryland. And so, yes, I've been a lawyer for 35 years, you know, so if you're interested in the law, if you're a student and want to do it, first thing is you have to go to law school. Law school is a graduate school, right? So if you're in high school now or middle school going to high school, you're interested in the law as a career, you want to be a lawyer, first thing you have to do is obtain your undergraduate degree. And that's, you know, usually a 4-year degree, and it could be in different subjects. And then you have to go to law school. Law school is a 3 or 4-year program, and you get a graduate degree. And I have, I'm not called doctor like Dr. Liu, but I have a Juris Doctorate. That's the degree I have. And after you do all that schooling, and you get your Juris Doctorate, then you get to take a big test called the bar exam, right? It's not an easy test. It's very difficult. And in order to be a lawyer, you have to pass this bar exam. And it's a 2 or 3 day exam that's implemented by the Board of Law Examiners, the legal system in the state, that's difficult, that you have to pass. And if you pass that, you become a lawyer. I'll tell you, I just saw the results for the February exam. They do it twice a year, and 39% of the people who took the exam passed. So it tells you it's not an easy exam. Now you can take it again up to a few times, but you do all that and you can become a lawyer. And to be a judge, you have to do that, and then you have to be a lawyer. So I've been a lawyer for 35 years before this, and that's how you get to be a judge, and that's how you get to be a lawyer.
Thank you. The next question is, are you allowed to not accept jury duty?
Am I not allowed to have jury duty?
Question is, are you allowed to not accept jury duty? So if you receive a jury summons, are you allowed not to accept it, not to go to jury?
No. You're talking about an average, like a person, a citizen. No, but well, here's the situation with it. A jury summons, when you get a summons means it's a court order, right? That's what a summons is. The court is ordering you to do something. Now, if you defy a court order, you could be subject to arrest, right? That's how a summons is an order of the court that compels you to do certain things. So you can ignore it, but I can tell you people have been brought in when they ignore jury summons. And I'll also tell you this about jury summons. It's applied randomly. People are chosen. As a matter of fact, about just before I think it was in February, just before we had the problem we're in now with the health crisis, I received a jury summons. So actually I had to serve on jury duty. And I was in the court just as like everyone else. Even though I'm a judge, I was summoned to appear in court. So everybody gets a jury summons, has to obey, and I did it just like everyone else. So if you get that jury summons, it's not something you want to ignore or to defy. It's not a good thing.
Yeah. The next question is, what were you running for? So I think probably they saw your signs and they said,
okay.
What were you
running? I'm glad you asked that. The way the system works, I didn't explain. So when you're a judge and you're chosen, the way it works in our state is you go through a very rigorous and competitive process to be a judge. And the way it works is first you apply. There's an opening for a judge, and they invite people to apply. And to apply, you have to fill out about a 30 or 40-page application that's asks you everything you've ever done in your life, asks you cases you've had, judges you've appeared before, lawyers you've appeared with, everything that you've done. That's investigated, and then you interview with various different bar associations, about 13 different interviews. Then you interview what's called the Judicial Nominating Commission, and they take the list of people who apply, they go through all this investigation, and they interview people again. They contact judges, lawyers, they do a thorough investigation of you, and the Judicial Nominating Commission takes these other opinions, and they they make a list of all the people who applied, and they recommend what's called a short list to the governor of the people who they think are the most qualified. And so when I applied for a judge, there were 13 people who applied, and 5 were found to be qualified, and their names were submitted to the governor. Then the governor and his people, the executive branch, do their own investigation of you, and that takes another couple months. This whole process takes 3, 4, 5 months to go through this. And at the end of all that, the governor does his investigation. His team looks at you thoroughly. You actually interview with the governor. You all go down to Annapolis, interview with the governor, and then the governor makes his choice. So at the end of all that, the governor chose me to be on the bench, to be the judge. But the only rub with all that, even though I've been a judge and acting, is, according to our law, I have to run to keep my job in the next election. And if you've seen my sign, that's where we are now. I'm running to keep my job. So that's why you see my name out there, because even though I'm the judge, I'm required to have to run, and people can run against me, even though they were not selected through this process. Basically, they can sign up and try to run. So that's why I'm out there. So I'm a candidate now, but I'm also the judge. All right?
Yeah. So the next question is, when you are judging, do people have to call you Your Honor?
Well, so here's the situation with that. So in court, generally that's what you're called, Your Honor. And it's not a thing of necessarily respect to me personally, but the reason we put judges on this pedestal, so to speak, is because it's respect for the law, and it's respect for the system, right? We have very, very important rights in this country that, look, we live in the greatest country in the world, right? We have so much freedom, so much liberty, so many rights, and we live under this system of laws. So when we talk about Your Honor, it's respect for the system of laws we have in the country. So yes, I can tell you, when I first I was never used to being called Your Honor, but that's what used in court. Generally, outside of court, people will call me Judge. Again, it's a sign of respect for the law. It took some getting used to. I almost forgot my first name sometimes because I'm called Judge more than I'm called my first name. But it's not so much respect for the person; it's respect for the law. That's why we use those terms.
The next question is, how do cases get directed to the U.S. Supreme Court?
Okay, that's a great question. They get that way because you have to ask the Supreme Court to take the cases. The Supreme Court decides the most important cases in kind of areas of law that have not been decided before. So in order to get a case to the Supreme Court, you have to have some kind of federal jurisdiction. It has to be some kind of federal connection for a federal case. So if one way there's a federal connection is if you violated a federal law or you violated a constitutional right, the Supreme Court could take those cases. What happens is the Supreme Court, I told you about the different levels of the court system. The case works its way up from the district court to the courts of appeal, and then the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court just doesn't take any case. You have to basically file what's called a writ of certiorari, which is a lot of special papers to say, judges of the Supreme Court, this is a very important case, and this is why we think you should consider this case. And the Supreme Court is very selective about what it takes. And they only take cases that are among the most important, that have the biggest impact on society or on our law. And so they pick and choose their cases. So that's how the cases get it to the Supreme Court.
Our next question is pretty long, so I will read it. How do you believe that the presumption of innocence affects the objective balance between the defense and the prosecution? Does this mean that the scale is somewhat always tipped in the defense's favor?
Well, that's a good question. Again, and you're right. It is, in some respects, tipped in the favor when you start off. I mean, one of the things we tell a jury when they come in is this person is charged with a crime. They are presumed innocent until the moment you decide that they are guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And the reason we do that is because we take people's rights very seriously in this country, right? If we're going to take away their freedom and their liberty and put them in jail and take them away from their families and their jobs and put them in prison where they can't go out, we want to be sure that they've committed a crime. So the prosecution, the government, has a burden of proving that this person is guilty. As a matter of fact, what we tell in the criminal case when we instruct the jury, we say that the defendant doesn't have any burden at all. The defendant can sit there silently and not say anything at all, and they don't have to prove anything. It's the state's burden to always prove that that person is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And the reason we do that is because people have rights, and we don't want to take away their liberty and freedom unless the evidence is so strong that they should be found guilty. So, excellent question, and that's why we do things that way.
The next question is, why do you want to be a judge?
Well, one reason is, I've had the job for a while, and I like it a lot. And I can tell you, when you've done the law for a long time, being a judge is kind of the ultimate. It's a very, very interesting job. It's it's always challenging. It gets your brain going, right? It's very intellectually stimulating. You're learning something new. I mean, I've been doing this for 35 years, practicing law. There's not a week goes by, even today, that I don't learn something new. That's how involved and complicated the law is. But the biggest thing about being a judge, and I enjoy the most, is it's one of those jobs, and it's a very, very it's a very big responsibility. It's awe-inspiring. When I decide cases that involve people's lives, right? I've sent people to jail for a long time. I've decided cases where people get divorced. How do I divide who gets the house and who doesn't? Some of the cases I've decided are involving children. Who gets the kids and who doesn't? What the visitation is. I've involved cases involving money. If you have a business and you sue somebody, I mean, your business could depend on what the decision is in the case. These are decisions that affect people's lives. They're very, very important. I believe that more than many times, it's the kind of thing where I wake up in the middle of the night and I agonize over these things to make the right decision. But I can tell you, the biggest thing about being a judge is it's the greatest satisfaction in the world, because you feel like you're helping people. And that's why, the main reason. It's like, at the end of the day, when we do all this, and it's a tough job, but you really feel like you've done some good for people. And that's why I want to be a judge.
The next question is, what if the person charged with a crime bribes the jury, or if the jury is that person's friend?
Well, if the juror is that person's friend, they wouldn't be allowed to be on the jury in the first place, because jurors are picked. The lawyers involved in the case actually pick the jurors, and we go through a process called voir dire, which is a French words that mean to see, to speak. And we just don't bring people in and say, you go on the jury. They're actually selected. You ask them a series of questions. And one of the questions you ask is, do you know the defendant? Do you know the parties? So now people usually don't get by that system. So that's usually not a problem. Now, in terms of bribe, that's a crime. Okay. So if that ever happened, that's a pretty serious crime. So I personally have never experienced that. I know it, sometimes it's happened. It's never happened to me in 35 years of practicing law. Has it happened sometime in the past somewhere? Probably has, but that usually doesn't happen. So that's why we go through this system, to make sure things like that don't happen.
Our next question is also a pretty long question. How will searching for jurors without predilection work in the case of an infamous celebrity, for example? Many laymen will have some sort of bias if they were jurors for O.J. Simpson, as most people have formed opinions regarding his murder trial.
Well, you're getting some great questions, Dr. Liu. Well, we go through this process, and you keep asking the questions. Basically, we get questions from the lawyers who represent both parties, designed to make sure that people have no biases. So let's say we had one of those celebrities or somebody who was infamous, and people had heard of them. One of the ways we go about making sure we have a fair jury and objective, and that they don't have biases, is we bring in more jurors. So on a small case or average case, we may only bring in 20 or 30 people and pick 12 jurors from that, because you get a certain amount of strikes. Let's say if it was a case that was going to last a long time, we might bring in 100 or 200 people, because we want to make sure that, so we just go through people until we find jurors who are going to be fair. And that's the big thing is you have to eliminate any connection, and you have to eliminate any bias, because what we want is people who are not going to decide the case before they hear the evidence. That it's very important in our court that you only decide based on the evidence in the case. You can't decide it on anything else. You have to decide only on what happens in the courtroom. And if you're using outside things to come in and decide cases, that's wrong, and that's against our system of justice, and we can't have that.
So the next question is, are the robes you wear comfortable?
Actually, they're not that bad. We're here casually, and I'm talking to you from my home. I would have put on the robe, but there's no need for it. And I usually have a tie under the robe. They're long, and they're, but you get to kind of pick which one you want. And I pick one that's a little loose, so I have a little elbow room. It could be hot if you're sitting there for a while, but usually kind of you get used to it, so it's not that bad. I have no complaints.
Okay, and then there is another question. Okay, I don't know how to pronounce that word. Javel, what is the right pronunciation? No, that's my question. Okay, then I will repeat the question. How do you pronounce the word Javel?
Javel?
Uh-huh.
Javel? I don't know.
Okay, so the question is, why do judges have, is that you pronounce it Javel? Or maybe for the person who asked this question, can you unmute yourself and ask? Because I don't know the exact pronunciation of that word. That's from Lin Feng Chen. Can you unmute yourself? And ask?
Gavel. Are you saying
Gavel?
Gavel, okay.
Gavel, the little hammer.
Yes.
Okay.
So what's the question about the gavel?
The question is, why do judges have gavels?
Well, that's a good question also. I think it's a symbol of order in the court. I will tell you, I don't have a gavel in court. Usually, I raise my voice if I if I need to a little bit. I've seen other courts do. It's usually to signify to get people to stop or that the proceeding is over. It's symbolic more than anything. You know, I'm not aware. I mean, I have a symbolic gavel in my chambers, but I've never used it in court. And none of the judges in our court now in Howard County use them. I've seen others who do. It's more a symbolic thing, a symbol of order to maintain order in court. One of the very important things we do in court is you have to respect the system and the dignity of the process. You know, you may have seen on TV some of these crazy shows like Jerry Springer and that kind of thing where people are going crazy, and we don't do that. We operate under the rule of law. We don't have people lunging at each other and going crazy. And I'm telling you, there can be some heated emotions in the courtroom. And you know, we have deputies in there to make sure nothing happens. And people can get upset, especially, you know, in cases involving, you know, their family or in criminal cases. I mean, people can get upset and go after things. It has happened. But the gavel is kind of a symbol to restore order. It's not absolutely necessary, but many people use it. We don't.
The next question is, does a court judge have a power to pardon?
Not to, the executive has the power to pardon, the executive branch. What a judge can do is can modify a sentence. So sometimes if we sentence someone to a certain period, routinely after their sentencing, their lawyer will file what's called a motion for modification or to reconsider their sentence. And sometimes the court will do that depending on what they had. So we can say, so for example, someone will, let's say they're sentenced to 5 years in prison. They can file to say, Judge, please modify this or reconsider because this, and this happened. And I think I'm entitled to not 5 years, but 2 years. That can happen. But in terms of pardoning, no, judges don't pardon. The executive can pardon. So for example, in our state, people who are in prison can ask the governor to be pardoned, and the governor can do that, but I would not have the power to do that.
Our next question is also a long question. What are your thoughts on restorative injustice for inexperienced young adults, 18, 19 years old? Currently, they're often charged full sentences without a second chance, and they lose the most important years for career development of their lives.
Well, I can tell you this, I can't answer philosophical questions because I am a judge and I'm ethically bound to, I can't talk about things that appear before the court or issues likely to appear. I can tell you that I look at each case individually. I'm aware of the whole concept of restorative justice to the extent it's been memorialized or set forth in our law. I follow the law. I understand the concept. I mean, I can't say that, you know, I support this philosophy or another because I think that's ethically contrary to the canons. I can't give you an opinion on certain cases because I'm not allowed to do it as a judge. I can tell you that to the extent that those concepts are set forth in our law as passed by our General Assembly, I am bound to uphold them and have and will always follow the law. I can also tell you that, you know, I look at each case individually. I look at each case on its merits and closely. You know, the case where someone is young and, you know, is just starting out and has no criminal record, obviously that's a different aspect than someone who's, you know, older and has a series of history of committing crimes. But you have to look at each case individually and look at the circumstances and apply the law. And I'm not trying to duck the question. I'm just telling you that's the best I can do, because I can't give philosophical answers. I'm ethically prohibited from doing that. Okay.
Thank you. The next question, in American system, how many times have you felt that the laws are obsolete and needs to be changed according to the current times?
Well, as a trial judge, we don't change the law. I uphold the law. The appellate courts, the Supreme Court may change the law, as the ultimate arbiter, or the Court of Appeals in Maryland, but that's not the role of a trial judge. Our job is to implement the law. We should not be changing the law. Now, in a very limited circumstance where there is something not decided, would you have to make a decision that is different? I mean, that's possible, but in the trial courts, we don't legislate, we don't make new laws, we implement the law. So that's not something I would do. Okay.
Our next and the last question is, have you ever sentenced someone to death?
No. There's no death penalty in Maryland, so I have not done that. And I don't think that the death penalty is coming back. I mean, that's just, so the answer to that question is no. And no one can be sentenced to death in Maryland right now. Now, there has been a death penalty in the past. I don't think anyone has been executed in several years. And I think that actually it's all those sentences have been commuted to life in prison. But so no, the answer is no. And obviously that would be an awesome responsibility, but there is no death penalty in our state.
Okay, well, we received a couple more questions, so we'll keep it quick. Now it's already 4:03 to respect Judge Kuchno's time. So one question is about, can a president be accused of crime?
Can a president be accused of a crime? Well, that's an interesting philosophical issue. That's a federal case. And so that's not my place to decide. I think the Supreme Court, there's an interesting debate about that, but you're asking for my legal opinion on a case that's not before me. And ethically, that's not something that I can answer. I mean, I'm aware of the concept. I'm aware of how it's been debated before, but I don't give advisory legal opinions. I'm prohibited from doing that. So I really can't address that.
Okay, and then our next question actually is from a high school student, a rising senior at Centennial High School. He asked you many of the long questions, great questions. So he's very interested in legal studies. He wants to know whether you have any opportunity for him to have the internship within the circuit court or district court. How do we connect both of you so you can discuss it later?
You can certainly send me an email or call my chambers. We're kind of we're in this holding pattern now, unfortunately. We actually had planned to have a few people working with us this summer, and that has kind of been scrapped just because of the situation we're in, and it's put everything on hold. But assuming we can work it out and things get better, certainly would be open to that. And, I would invite, people to apply, and we could try to do something. The present situation, though, is there's just so much uncertainty that just the reality now is we don't know what's going to happen. Right now, our courts are closed and not supposed to be open until June the 8th is when we're supposed to start again. Again, I'm there at least usually one day a week on the bench every day. We've got 5 judges, and usually I have one day where I'm specifically hearing all the cases. The other cases, I'm either at home, working at home for things that are filed electronically, or I'm inside, but I'm not on the bench. I can tell you this, when we resume, it's going to be a tremendous amount of work. We are so backlogged by this situation. But in terms of if you're interested, I certainly would love to have you apply, and we could talk. I'd be happy to talk to anyone. If you want to send an email to my chambers in the court, yeah, we'd love to talk.
Okay, so Philip Wang, I'm not sure whether you have Judge Kuchno's contact info. If not, you can ask your parents to reach out to me, and then I can connect, or we can find out the court information. Yeah. So that is the student's name who asked the question. And thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for the great question. And thank you, Judge Kuchno, for this excellent talk and introduce the court system to our students. Thank you so much. So next week, we're going to have a talk about Magic Kingdom zeros and ones for elementary school students. Thank you all.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
See you next week.
Thank you. Thank you.